In this episode, we are talking about facts, opinion, and your right to preference. What is happening, people of the interwebs? It's Todd Frazier, the host of the Do Things podcast, which is exactly what you're listening to right now. Hope you're doing well. If you're new, welcome in. This is the podcast where we talk about taking action because no plan works if you never start it, and just kind of getting over the things that keep you from doing that. And if you're a regular listener, thank you so much for being here. We are glad that you are listening. I guess that's what we're glad about. And if you have a chance to like this, give us a rating on iTunes or wherever you're listening to podcasts. That would be great. Or if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you're seeing this, like it, share it with your friends, tell everybody, because we want to spread the message that you have to take action for anything to work. And that starts with doing things. All right, guys, let's get into talking about something that I think is rampant through any industry, anyone's life, any social media or digital platform. It doesn't matter. If there are people, there are arguments, right? I think you probably have all felt this at some point or another, especially from a political standpoint. But there is a very not fine line. I think it's a very broad line, but we just kind of make assumptions and do things that push it into being a quote unquote fine line between fact and opinion. And I think that's a big thing to differentiate between, because there are so many times that we talk about, or other people talk to us about, things that are fact, things that are the way it is, when that actually has a majority to do with their opinion and what their preference is. So like just recently this week we've I don't know if you know this, but the Fraziers have gone vegan. Now not like 100%. We're like 85, 90% vegan, just because you can't always be vegan when you're going somewhere and people are feeding you food. But we're vegan when we cook at home. We're vegan. We do as much as we can to eat plant-based only. And I don't mean to say that to offend you. That's just what our preference is, right? Right? Okay. So, but we've done that. And so that, because of that, Tammy has had to try and come up with some different kind of recipes that we didn't do before. And if you don't know, we have 3 kids. We have a 12-year-old and we have 10-year-old twins. And for most of the time, some of these recipes are pretty interesting, and there's a lot of really great ones. Don't get me wrong. I love a lot of them. But I think my favorite thing is vegan fajitas, where it's just fajita vegetables and a tortilla and guacamole. Like, how is that bad? That's awesome. Anyways, moving on. So we had this recipe that Tammy tried. We hadn't had it before. And so we're eating it. And my son takes a bite and he just kind of sits there and stares at it. And he says, Mom? She says, what? She says, I don't like it. I don't want to eat this. And we're like, okay, that's fine. We understand why. And he says, I don't want to. And he starts to like get this anxiety almost about telling us that he doesn't want to eat it. He's very sensitive. So he wants to make sure that he's not, doing something wrong or being rude or whatever. But so he's sitting there and he's telling us that he doesn't like it. And we're asking him, we're saying, that's fine. We understand. Why don't you like it? Because we're trying to decide, okay, is this recipe something that needs to be tweaked, or is it just horrible and needs to be thrown out? Because we're sitting there like, oh, it's not too bad. The girls are eating it, but he just doesn't like it. So we keep asking him, so what? Why don't you like it? We understand you're not in trouble. Why don't you like it? And he couldn't put his finger on what it was. It wasn't a certain ingredient, or it wasn't a specific thing that he could say, this is why I don't like it. And he started to break down. He started to be really sad about it. And he's like, I'm sorry, I just don't like it. I'm sorry. And we said, that's fine. That's fine, buddy. This is just preference. This is just an opinion. And you're totally entitled to have preference and opinion. That's how we do most things in life. It's okay to just prefer something else. Nothing wrong with that. That's totally fine. Okay? Now, if he had come back and said, this is a bad recipe, factually, and said, this is a bad recipe, and we say, why? He said, well, it's just because it's bad. Well, no, that's an opinion. That's a preference. And I think we get into that a lot, especially for things that we're passionate about, things that we really, really love to do or love to experience or have had good experiences with. We like to present those type of things like they are factual and that it makes sense for everything. Now, if you're in the marketing world, if you're like I do marketing for companies with social media and stuff, now there is a little bit of a preference that you want to try and push as fact for, to a certain extent without being completely outlandish. But there is a level of preference that gets presented as fact. And I think a lot of times we do that with things where we really get heated in, like, because it's usually passionate things that we get heated in. And we argue from the standpoint of actually from an opinion and not a fact, not a statistic, not historical data, but literally from an opinion or an experience that caused that thing in our heads, in our brains, in our minds to be the best XYZ, whatever it is. So I'll give you, I am an Apple. You see my Apple computer. I have an Apple Watch. I have an Apple iPhone. I have an iPad. I have Apple. Like, I love Apple, and I've converted from I don't remember, it was 2003 or something, and my brother bought his first iMac, and I said, ooh, that's really cool. And then I started getting into it, and then I just went crazy because I really liked it. It was simple. But you get into these conversations with people when you say, yeah, I'm an Apple person, and they instantly go to, if they're not an Apple fan, they instantly go to, well, but Samsung can do this and Android can do that and Apple can't. And I'm like, well, hold up. I wasn't trying to push my feelings about Apple and their products and how great they are on you. I was just saying, I think they're really great. My opinion, because of my experience and my preference, I think they're great. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with thinking something is great. Nothing wrong with that, because we all have preferences. We all like certain colors. We all like certain tastes. We all like certain atmospheres. We all like certain weather. I live in California. We just came back from an 86-day, 43 state and Canada trip, and it was great. And I saw a bunch of different countries, I saw 2 countries. I saw a bunch of different states, a bunch of different climates, a bunch of different towns, and they were awesome. I don't really want to live in any of them. I want to live in Southern California. I was glad to be home because that's what I prefer. Yes, there are reasons you could argue, well, California isn't as good as living in Colorado or living in Washington or living in Montana or living in New York. There's lots of things you could argue about that. But the fact is, now this is a fact, most of the time you're talking about an opinion. The reason I bring this up is I think we get really deep-seated in this argument a lot of times about an opinion when we're arguing from one side or the other, and we kind of just push our opinion as fact, and we speak matter-of-factly like, well, this is the way it is, when the reality is it's more of an opinion. Think about that. Think of I was just talking with my brother. I don't know if you're into the music industry at all, but there's this thing that's trying to get through Congress. It's the MMA. I don't even know what it stands for, but it has something to do with royalties and artists getting credit for what they're supposed to get credit for and actually getting paid, because with all the streaming services, anyway, I won't get into it. But the idea that we were talking about, he's an artist. He makes music. He makes films. He does that kind of stuff. And he was saying to me, well, this is really good, and this is going to change a lot of things. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, hold on. I don't know what you're talking about. I haven't read the facts. I'm pretty sure if it involves the government, there's a chance that there is going to be something that's going to not work the way that it's supposed to work. I'm doing air quotes, supposed to work. But it could be great. So I start talking with him about it, and he's talking about this MMA. He's really passionate about it because he's excited about the fact that if he puts music out there and it gets streamed on a service, he could get a royalty. Now, in my mind, from the business side and having experience in how a lot of this thing works, I think that it's a waste of energy yes, it would be great. Back up. It would be great if this gets passed and there are more artists that get paid a little bit more for what they create. But at the same time, I know how the world works, and that little bit is not going to be, you used to get a penny, now you get $1. That's not how it's going to happen. You used to get a penny, now you might get a penny and a half. Like from a statistical standpoint, you're not going to get that much more. And when you involve a big entity that has to create some sort of managing thing, there is resources that are going to get sucked out of the system somewhere. So my perspective was, yeah, sure, that's fine, but I don't think you should worry about it. Just focus on making music and monetize another way. So we got back and forth about this and actually got our family kind of uncomfortable because we were speaking, very not aggressively, but he was passionate and I was passionate, and we're very similar in that. So we were passionately discussing this. And also, it's another thing about me, if you don't know, is sometimes I like to what I call poke the bear. So let me kind of explain that a little bit. I have an opinion about something, and I see somebody else has an opinion about something, and we're discussing it. And if there's something that's just like lighting them up, that's making them just like kind of grind a little bit because they're so passionate, and I think it's like, well, okay, but let's be realistic. Again, opinion, but I sometimes like to twist the screws a little bit. I poke the bear, and I sit hard on one argument just because I think it's kind of fun to watch somebody get a little bit crazy. Now, I wasn't doing anything to intentionally make my brother upset, but we kind of got down a road where I was just sticking on my point. Like, okay, you have an opinion, I have an opinion. Let's just passionately talk about this opinion until it was time for dinner. And so I was pushing and just kind of poking the bear like I like to do. But it was all opinion based. There was no facts. He didn't have facts about the thing. I didn't know anything about it other than the fact that I know that there's a lot other ways to monetize than getting royalties from streaming services. Like that's, unless you're huge, there's not a lot in that. So from a practical standpoint, I didn't think it made much sense. But at the same time, I got caught in this. I was pushing buttons, and I was passionately discussing what this was from a standpoint of an opinion. We didn't have any facts. It was all concepts, and it was all ideas of what it could be. But we got into I'll call it an argument. It was a passionate discussion, but from the outside, like my kids and my wife and my dad and my stepmom, they were all like, they all left the kitchen when we were talking. But I think, so my point to say all of this is, guys, when you're talking with someone and it gets to a level of where you feel like this is not a positive outcome, or they are starting to get really aggressive in it, and sometimes it's just okay to say, you know what, we have different opinions. We have different preferences. You like one thing, I like another. You see it one way, I see it another. It's perspective. And if we can't come to any discussion with that mindset of saying, somebody might see this different, I see it this way, they see it that way. Well, let me think about their perspective for a second. And if it works together and you can kind of come together with some sort of agreement, great. But at the same time, it's okay to have a different opinion. It's okay to have a preference, but don't push that on other people and make them feel bad or make them feel less of a person because their opinion or preference is different than yours. Okay, if we're talking about facts, it's different, but there is so much of this that is pushed on because of passion, opinion, and preference. So think about that next time you're talking with somebody, and look at it from a place of maybe where they're coming from, what they've experienced. This all comes from what they've experienced and what they've had happen to them, or good or bad. And that comes out in a feeling of sometimes aggression, but a feeling of matter of fact, this is how it was for me. So this is how it is. So anyways, my point to all this is, guys, it's okay to have a different preference. Opinion is perfectly normal. Don't go into things and start pushing your opinion or preference on other people in a way that's going to make them feel less. And it doesn't help anybody. It doesn't make this world a better place. And that's what I believe we need to do. We need to make this world a better place, because you know what? You're a miracle. I don't care what your opinion or preference is about that. That's a fact. You're a miracle. The odds of you being alive is a miracle. I'm a miracle. And I believe we're all here to do amazing things. So get out there, have a preference, have an opinion. That's fine. But make this world a better place and do things. Guys, you got this. Don't worry. It's going to be okay. Just keep going. Until the next episode, I'm Todd Frazier. This is the Do Things Podcast. Thanks for checking us out. We will see you next time. All right, guys, if you want to know what's going on with me, you can hit me up on social media, TFrazierSoCal on every platform. FrazierMethod.com is where you can see a little bit more about me. I've got things on here on YouTube or on Facebook, wherever you're watching this. The podcast is coming with more content constantly, and we are really wanting to get this message out to people to do things. So if you wouldn't mind sharing this or telling your friend or liking this or giving us a review, any feedback we can get, even though it's not always helpful, feedback is something that's going to help us get better. So hit that like, hit that share, review, whatever. Do that for us. We'd really appreciate it. Get out there, do things, make it happen, because you can. and we will see you on the next episode, guys. See you later.